My name is Harold Whitmore. I'm 73 years old, and until the day my own son barred me from my granddaughter's wedding, I believed I understood what heartbreak felt like. I'd buried my wife of 46 years. I'd survived cancer. I'd watched friends disappear one funeral at a time. But nothing prepared me for the moment my son looked me in the eye and treated me like a stranger. The wedding was being held at a beautiful vineyard just outside Asheville, North Carolina. Sophie, my granddaughter, had always dreamed of getting married there. She used to show me pictures of the place when she was still in college, pointing at the rolling hills and white gazebos while talking about the future with the excitement only young people possess. I arrived 40 minutes early. Old habit. My late wife always said I treated every important event like a military operation. The morning air was warm, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Guests were already gathering near the entrance, laughing and taking photographs. I stood for a moment in the parking lot, smiling as I watched them. My granddaughter was getting married. Despite everything that had happened between my son Derek and me over the past few years, I genuinely believed we could put our differences aside for one day. I should have known better. As I approached the entrance, I noticed two men wearing black suits standing beside a guest check-in table. Security. Strange. This wasn't a political fundraiser. It was a family wedding. Still, I continued walking. One of the guards glanced at his clipboard, then at me, then back at the clipboard. His expression immediately changed. "Sir, may I have your name?" "Harold Whitmore." The man frowned. He checked again. Then he looked uncomfortable. "Could you wait here for a moment?" A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Within 30 seconds, my son appeared. Derek was wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He didn't smile. He didn't greet me. He didn't even pretend to be happy to see me. He walked directly toward me and stopped 3 feet away. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" "You're not invited." The words landed like a punch to the chest. I stared at him. Surely this was some kind of misunderstanding. "Sophie invited me herself." "No," he replied flatly. She didn't. Several nearby guests had stopped talking. I could feel their eyes on us. "Derek," I said quietly, "this isn't funny. I'm not joking." I looked at him for some sign of humanity, some indication that this was a mistake. There was none, only cold determination. "You want me to leave?" The security guards shifted awkwardly. "You're not on the list, Dad." "Yes." I felt something break inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something worse. Disappointment. The kind that comes from realizing someone you love has become a person you no longer recognize. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. "All right." His expression briefly flickered with surprise. Maybe he'd expected a scene, an argument, a public confrontation. Instead, I simply turned around and walked back toward my car. I heard whispers behind me. I heard people staring, but I never looked back. The drive home took nearly an hour. I don't remember most of it. My hands gripped the steering wheel while memories flooded my mind. Teaching Derek how to ride a bicycle, helping him move into his first apartment, paying off debts he never knew I discovered, defending him when others criticize him, every sacrifice, every second chance, every excuse I'd made for him, and somehow it had led to this. By the time I reached my house, the wedding ceremony had probably begun. I sat in my driveway for almost 20 minutes before going inside. The silence felt unbearable. I wandered into my study and lowered myself into the old leather chair where I handled most of my finances. I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for distraction. Anything to keep my mind from imagining Sophie walking down the aisle without knowing her grandfather had been turned away at the door. That's when I noticed the envelope. It was sitting on my desk, plain white, no return address, no stamp. Someone had delivered it by hand. Frowning, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At first glance, it looked like a routine financial statement. Then I noticed the account number. My pulse stopped. I recognized it immediately. The Whitmore Family Trust. A private fund I had created 20 years earlier for Sophie. A fund nobody was supposed to know existed. Not Derek. Not anyone. Only me and my attorney. Yet attached to the statement was a record showing multiple recent access requests. Someone had been trying to get inside the trust. Someone had been searching through confidential files. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten message appeared in black ink point 5 words. 5 words that instantly made me forget the humiliation of the wedding. Because suddenly, I realized something far more dangerous was happening. The message read, "Your son knows about the trust." And beneath it was one final sentence. "He'll do anything to get it." I must have read that note a dozen times before the reality of it finally settled in. The Whitmore family trust wasn't just another bank account. It represented 20 years of planning, sacrifice, and promises I'd made to my late wife before she passed away. After Sophie was born, Margaret and I agreed that no matter what happened in our family, our granddaughter would always have a secure future. Every major contract I completed, every bonus I earned, and every investment that paid off sent money into that trust. Over the years, it quietly grew into a substantial fortune intended solely for Sophie. I never told Derek about it because I knew my son too well. Even as a young man, he had a habit of viewing money as a solution to every problem. Whenever he found himself in trouble, he expected someone else to rescue him. More often than not, that someone was me. As I stared at the documents, memories began flooding back. About 6 months earlier, Derek had unexpectedly started calling more often. At first, I thought he was trying to repair our strained relationship. He invited me to dinners, asked questions about my retirement plans, and showed unusual interest in my finances. Looking back, I realized every conversation had revolved around money. At the time, I dismissed it as concern for an aging father. Now I wasn't so sure. I immediately called my attorney, Evelyn Carter. She answered on the second ring. When I explained what I had found, the silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds longer than I liked. Finally, she sighed and admitted there was something she hadn't wanted to worry me about until she had more information. Over the previous 3 months, multiple inquiries had been made regarding the trust. Whoever submitted them knew enough personal information to appear legitimate. They had requested account details, beneficiary records, and access procedures. Fortunately, the requests had been denied, but the persistence concerned her. When I asked who made them, she told me the source couldn't be verified. Yet her hesitation told me she already suspected the answer. After ending the call, I sat alone in my study as pieces of a puzzle slowly began fitting together. Derek's sudden interest in my finances, his cold behavior at the wedding, the mysterious note. None of it felt random anymore. Then another memory surfaced. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had tried calling Sophie 3 separate times. Every call went straight to voicemail. I left messages but never received a response. I had also sent her a handwritten letter congratulating her and telling her how proud I was. She never acknowledged receiving it. At the time, I assumed wedding planning had simply made her busy. Now a troubling possibility entered my mind. What if she never received any of those messages? What if someone had made sure she didn't? The thought refused to leave me. Sophie and I had always shared a special bond. She called me every Sunday without fail. She visited on holidays. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and even small details most people forgot. The idea that she would suddenly exclude me from her wedding without explanation didn't match the granddaughter I knew. As evening approached, I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, but my hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the mug. For the first time all day, anger began replacing sadness. Not because I had missed a wedding, but because I could feel something larger hiding beneath the surface. Someone had worked very hard to keep me away from Sophie. Someone had been digging into a trust they were never supposed to know existed. And someone had convinced my own son that I didn't belong at my granddaughter's wedding. Just as I was trying to decide what to do next, my phone buzzed. A new email had arrived from an unfamiliar address. There was no greeting, no signature, only a single sentence attached to a photograph. My heart nearly stopped when I opened it. The photograph showed Derek sitting inside a restaurant with 2 men I had never seen before. Spread across their table were financial documents. One of them clearly displayed the logo of the Whitmore Family Trust. Beneath the image, the anonymous sender had written 7 chilling words. This started long before the wedding, Harold. I barely slept that night. The photograph sat open on my computer screen for hours while I studied every detail. Derek looked nervous. The two men sitting across from him were strangers, both dressed in expensive suits. Both focused on the document spread across the table. Whoever had taken the picture had done so from a distance, but the image was clear enough for me to recognize the trust logo. That alone was impossible. The Whitmore Family Trust was a private arrangement known only to a handful of people. The more I stared at the photo, the more one question consumed me. How had Derek discovered something that was supposed to remain secret? By sunrise, I knew sitting around wouldn't provide answers. I drove straight to Evelyn Carter's office. The moment she saw my face, she knew something had changed. After showing her the photograph, she became unusually serious. She locked her office door and pulled a file from a cabinet. What she revealed next explained why she had sounded worried during our phone call. 3 months earlier, someone had attempted to obtain access to confidential trust records by presenting authorization documents supposedly signed by me. The signatures looked authentic at first glance, but a forensic review later determined they were forged. My stomach tightened as she slid copies across her desk. There was my name, my signature, my approval, except none of it had come from me. Someone had gone through significant effort to imitate my handwriting. Someone desperate enough to commit fraud. As disturbing as that was, an even greater shock arrived moments later. Evelyn informed me that one inquiry had included a request for Sophie's future distribution schedule. In simple terms, someone wanted to know exactly when she would gain access to the trust's assets. That wasn't curiosity. That was planning. Leaving her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Fear. Not for myself. For Sophie. The more pieces I uncovered, the more convinced I became that my granddaughter was caught in something she didn't understand. Back at home, I decided to do something I hadn't attempted since before the wedding. I called Sophie again, straight to voicemail. I tried a second time. The same result. Then I sent a text message. No response. An hour later, I sent an email. Nothing. By evening, frustration was replacing patience. Sophie had never ignored me like this before. Even during college finals, she always found a moment to answer. The silence felt unnatural. Then another memory surfaced. Nearly 2 years earlier, Sophie had given me a small leather journal as a birthday gift. Inside, she had written something I would never forget. No matter how busy life gets, Grandpa, you'll always be one of the most important people in my world. I still kept that journal in my bedroom drawer. Looking at it now made the situation even harder to believe. This wasn't the behavior of someone who suddenly wanted me gone. 2 days after the wedding, another unexpected development arrived. While sorting through old mail, I noticed an envelope that had been delivered weeks earlier, but accidentally mixed with advertisements. The handwriting immediately caught my attention. It belonged to Sophie. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter dated nearly a month before the wedding. In it, Sophie thanked me for promising to attend the ceremony and wrote that she couldn't imagine walking down the aisle without seeing me in the front row. I read those words 3 times, then 4. My chest felt tight. According to this letter, she fully expected me to be there, which meant one thing. She had not removed me from the guest list. Someone else had. Suddenly, every strange event from the past several months began forming a horrifying picture. The unanswered phone calls, the missing responses, the wedding rejection, the forged trust documents. None of it was random. Someone had been controlling information on both sides, keeping Sophie away from me while keeping me away from Sophie. The question was why. That evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. Normally, I ignored calls like that. This time, I answered. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a young female voice whispered something that instantly made my blood run cold. Mr. Whitmore? Sophie doesn't know what they've told you. Before I could respond, the caller added one final sentence. And you don't know what they've told her. Then the line went dead. The anonymous phone call haunted me for the next several days. I couldn't stop replaying those words in my head. Sophie doesn't know what they've told you. And you don't know what they've told her. Whoever the caller was, She clearly knew something important. More importantly, she sounded frightened. That told me two things. First, I wasn't imagining the deception surrounding my granddaughter. Second, someone inside the family circle was becoming uncomfortable enough to risk reaching out. For the first time since being turned away from the wedding, I felt like I was getting close to the truth. The problem was proving it. 3 days later, Evelyn called with another update. Her voice carried a level of urgency I hadn't heard before. During a deeper review of trust-related inquiries, her office discovered that someone had not only forged documents, but had also attempted to establish a new contact address for future correspondence. Had the request succeeded, all notifications regarding Sophie's trust would have been redirected elsewhere. In other words, whoever was behind this wanted complete control over information concerning the money. When Evelyn forwarded the paperwork to me, I immediately recognized the address listed on the forms. It belonged to an office building downtown where Derek's consulting company rented space. My hands tightened around the papers. For months, I tried convincing myself there might be another explanation. Now that hope was disappearing. That evening, I decided to visit someone I hadn't spoken with in nearly a year. Richard Hayes, my longtime financial advisor. Richard had known our family for decades and understood both my business affairs and my son's personality better than most people. After hearing everything, he leaned back in his chair and remained silent for several moments. Then he said something that chilled me. A few months earlier, Derek had approached him privately asking general questions about inheritance structures, trust distributions, and beneficiary rights. At the time, Richard thought nothing of it. Now the timing looked suspicious. According to Richard, Derek seemed unusually interested in how quickly assets could be accessed after a beneficiary became eligible. Sophie had turned 26 only 6 weeks earlier, the exact age at which she would gain greater authority regarding the trust. The realization hit me like a freight train. This had never been about the wedding. The wedding had simply been a distraction. The real objective was the trust. Everything else, the lies, the isolation, the humiliation, was designed to remove me from the equation long enough for someone to gain access to money that was never theirs. But there was still one missing piece. Sophie. I needed proof she was being manipulated. Fate delivered that proof sooner than I expected. The following afternoon, another envelope arrived at my home. No return address. No indication of who sent it. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. The note contained only 4 words. She deserves the truth. My pulse quickened as I inserted the drive into my computer. What appeared on the screen left me speechless. It contained dozens of screenshots, text messages, emails, voicemail transcripts. Some had been sent by me. Others had been sent by Sophie. Messages neither of us had ever received. One email from Sophie was dated nearly 2 months before the wedding. In it, she apologized for not visiting recently and said she couldn't wait to celebrate with me on her special day. Another message showed her asking Derek if I had received the wedding itinerary. His response was simple and devastating. Don't worry. Grandpa said he probably won't come. My chest tightened as I read further. There were more lies, more deception, more manipulation. Derek had been intercepting communication for months. He had convinced Sophie that I was withdrawing from the family because of age and health concerns. At the same time, he convinced me that Sophie had grown distant and no longer wished to remain close. He had built a wall between us brick by brick until neither side could see the other. By midnight, I had reviewed every file on the flash drive. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet one document stood above all the others. It was a scanned memorandum sent between Derek and one of the men from the restaurant photograph. Near the bottom appeared a sentence that made my blood run cold. Once Harold is permanently removed from family decisions, trust access becomes significantly easier. I stared at those words for a very long time. Then, for the first time since all of this began, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood something important. Derek believed he was winning. He believed I was isolated, confused, and powerless. He had no idea I now possessed enough evidence to destroy every lie he had built, and he certainly didn't know that the biggest confrontation of his life was only days away. For the next 4 days, I said nothing. I didn't call Derek. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him that his secrets were unraveling. Instead, I worked quietly with Evelyn and Richard, organizing every piece of evidence: the forged signatures, the intercepted emails, the altered contact information, the financial inquiries, the messages proving Sophie and I had been deliberately kept apart. By the time we finished, the truth was no longer suspicion. It was a documented fact. Then fate gave me one final opportunity. A week after the wedding, Sophie and Nathan hosted a private family reception for relatives who had traveled from out of state. Derek attended, confident as ever, believing his lies remained intact. What he didn't know was that Sophie had finally discovered the truth the night before. Evelyn had helped arrange a meeting between us. And for the first time in months, I sat across from my granddaughter. The moment she saw the evidence, she broke down in tears. She showed me dozens of unanswered messages she'd sent. I showed her the letters and calls I had made. Within minutes, we both realized we had been victims of the same deception. The reunion was emotional, painful, and healing all at once. But neither of us was interested in revenge for its own sake. We wanted the truth exposed. The following evening, the family gathered inside a private banquet hall. Derek laughed with guests, shook hands, and enjoyed the attention that always seemed to follow him. Then Sophie stood and tapped her glass. The room gradually fell silent. Derek smiled proudly, expecting a speech about marriage and family. Instead, Sophie looked directly at him and said, "Before we continue tonight, there are some things everyone deserves to know." The smile vanished from his face almost immediately. One by one, the documents were displayed on large presentation screens around the room. The intercepted messages, the forged paperwork, the evidence showing months of manipulation. Gasps echoed through the hall. Relatives stared in disbelief. Some looked at me. Others looked at Derek. No one spoke. Then Sophie revealed the final piece. The trust. She explained that her grandfather had spent 20 years quietly securing her future, and that someone had attempted to gain access to funds that did not belong to them. Derek's face turned pale. He tried to interrupt, tried to explain, tried to blame misunderstandings and administrative errors. But every excuse collapsed beneath the weight of the evidence. The room had already seen the truth. There was nowhere left for him to hide. For the first time in his life, nobody came to rescue him. Nobody defended him. Nobody believed him. When Sophie asked a simple question, "Why?" he couldn't answer. Maybe because there was no answer that could justify what he had done. Not greed, not pride, not fear. Nothing could explain destroying relationships, manipulating family members, and stealing trust from the people who loved him most. Before leaving the room, Derek looked at me. I expected anger. Instead, I saw something else. Regret. Genuine regret. Not because he had been caught, but because he finally understood the cost of his actions. Unfortunately, some mistakes cannot be undone. The legal consequences arrived quickly. Investigators reviewed the forged documents and unauthorized inquiries. Business partners distanced themselves. His reputation suffered. More painful than any financial loss, however, was the damage to the relationships he had taken for granted. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Months later, life looked very different. Sophie and Nathan settled into married life. The trust remained exactly where it belonged, in her hands and under her protection. Sunday phone calls returned. Family dinners returned. Laughter returned. Some wounds healed slowly, but they healed nonetheless. As for me, I learned something important at 73 years old. Sometimes the deepest betrayals come from the people closest to us. But truth has a remarkable way of finding daylight. On a quiet autumn afternoon, Sophie visited my home and handed me a framed photograph from her wedding day. At first, I was confused. I hadn't been there. Then I looked closer. The photograph wasn't from the ceremony. It had been taken during our reunion a week later. The two of us were standing together, smiling through tears. At the bottom of the frame, she had engraved a message. I still keep it on my desk today. It reads, "The most important person was never missing from my wedding. He was simply waiting for the truth to find its way home. And after everything that happened, I finally knew she was right.